Ranger Jake Whitehorse had seen droughts before, but never silence like this. Zion had gone mute. No birds. No insects. No life. Then he found the bull, alone at Angel's Pool, now bone dry. The massive creature stood like a statue, muscles tight, eyes burning. He wasn't wild. He was waiting. Jake had seen wolves take cattle, lions stalk hikers, but this bull? He was different. Unbranded, unafraid, and standing exactly where the spring used to be. Then the ground cracked beneath him. Something ancient was shifting, something the bull had been guarding. Not water, not territory. A secret buried beneath the cliffs. The same cliffs Jake's ancestors had warned him never to disturb. Now, the predators were circling. The land was dying, and the bull was no longer just a survivor. He was a message. And Jake? He was already too deep to walk away. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun crested the crimson cliffs of Zion National Park at 5:47 a.m., painting the sandstone walls in shades of fire that Jake Whitehorse had witnessed for 25 years running. But this morning felt different, wrong, in ways that settled deep in his bones like winter cold. The air hung still and brittle, devoid of the morning moisture that should have kissed the high desert landscape. Even the ancient Navajo prayers his grandmother had taught him seemed to catch in his throat, absorbed by the parched earth before they could reach the sky. Jake adjusted his Park Service radio and began his patrol down the Angel's Landing Trail, his weathered boots finding purchase on rocks that crumbled more easily than they should. The drought had entered its 8th month, the longest on record, and every step revealed new evidence of nature's distress. Prickly pear cacti, normally resilient sentinels of the desert, showed withered pads that spoke of desperation. Even the hardy cliff rose bushes had retreated into survival mode, their leaves curled tight against the relentless sun. Base, this is Ranger Whitehorse beginning morning patrol, Sector 7. Jake spoke into his radio, his voice carrying the measured calm of a man who'd learned to read the land's moods like a favorite book. The response crackled back, immediately unusual. For this early hour, Jake, thank God you're out there early. Chief Ranger Patricia Stone's voice carried an edge that made Jake pause mid-step. We've got 3 separate incidents from overnight. Martinez found fresh wolf sign within 50 yards of the Riverside Walk. Henderson Ranch called about missing cattle again. And get this, hikers reported seeing the big cat near Angel's Pool around midnight. Jake's weathered face creased into a frown. Angel's Pool, one of the last reliable water sources in the entire southern section of the park. In normal years, the small spring-fed oasis provided drinking water for dozens of species while maintaining enough flow to support the delicate ecosystem downstream. This year, it had become a battleground. Copy that, Chief. I'm 20 minutes out from Angel's Pool. Any specifics on the cat sighting? Negative. Couple from Denver. Probably couldn't tell a bobcat from a mountain lion if their lives depended on it. But the timing's got me worried. That's prime wolf territory now, and if we've got predators converging on the last water source. Jake didn't need her to finish the thought. Desperate animals made desperate choices, and desperate choices led to dead tourists, dead animals, or both. He picked up his pace, following the familiar trail that wound between towering sandstone formations toward the hidden canyon where Angel's Pool waited. The silence struck him first. In 25 years of morning patrols, Jake had never experienced such absolute quiet in the backcountry. No bird songs heralded the dawn. No rustle of small mammals foraging in the undergrowth. Even the ever-present buzz of insects had faded to nothing. The desert had gone mute, holding its breath in anticipation of something Jake couldn't yet name. As he rounded the final bend before Angel's Pool, Jake's trained eye immediately caught the story written in the dust and dried mud around. The water source. Tracks layered upon tracks, some fresh enough to show moisture still darkening the edges. Wolf prints of full pack by the size and distribution marked the northern approach. Fresh deer sign showed where a small herd had approached from the east, only to flee south in apparent panic based on the scattered pattern and depth of their hoofprints. But it was the other tracks that made Jake stop dead in his path. Pulling out his field glasses for a closer look, mountain lion prints, large, enough to indicate a mature female, approached from the west. Normal enough cougars needed water like everything else. But overlaying those prints, impossibly fresh and deep enough to suggest an animal weighing well over a ton, were bovine tracks. Not elk, not deer, not bighorn sheep. Cattle tracks. Specifically, the tracks of a very large bull. Jake knelt beside the clearest print, pulling out his phone to document what he was seeing. The bull track measured nearly 6 inches across, massive even by ranch standards. But more puzzling was the pattern. Instead of the scattered, panicked tracks you'd expect from a lost domestic animal, these prints showed purposeful movement. The bull had approached the water source, drunk extensively based on the disturbed mud patterns, and then stayed. Stranger still, the mountain lion tracks didn't circle the area in hunting patterns. They moved in deliberate parallels to the bull's path, almost as if double quotes no way, Jake muttered to himself, shaking his head. 25 years of wildlife observation, and he'd never seen anything like this. Predator and prey didn't share water sources. They certainly didn't travel together. Every instinct, every piece of training, every scientific principle he'd learned screamed that what he was seeing was impossible. His radio crackled again. "Jake, you copy? We've got 2 more ranchers calling about missing livestock. Henderson's offering a $1,000 reward for his prize bull. Says the animal's worth more than his truck. Copy that, Chief." Jake stood slowly, his eyes scanning the rim rocks above Angel's Pool. "I'm at Angel's Pool now. Definitely got some unusual sign here. Going to need some time to document properly." "Unusual how?" Jake hesitated. Patricia Stone was a good administrator, but she'd climbed the bureaucratic ladder by avoiding controversy and minimizing risk. What he was looking at would sound crazy to anyone who hadn't seen it firsthand. Hell, it sounded crazy to him. Large predator and livestock sign in the same area. Conflicting behavioral patterns. I need to investigate further before I file a report. Livestock means rancher problems. Predator means tourist safety issues. I don't like where this is heading, Jake. How long do you need? Jake checked his watch. 6:15 a.m. The sun was climbing higher, and soon the afternoon heat would drive any sensible animal into shade. If he was going to solve this mystery, he needed to move fast. "Give me 2 hours. If there's a problem situation developing, I need to understand it before we start making intervention decisions. 2 hours. Then I want a full report. And Jake? Be careful out there. Desperate animals don't follow the rule book." As Jake signed off and began following the impossible tracks deeper into the canyon, he couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia's words carried more weight than she realized. The drought had indeed pushed everyone, animal and human alike, beyond the normal rules. The question was whether adaptation would triumph over catastrophe, or whether the unforgiving desert would claim them all. The tracks led him toward a narrow side canyon he'd explored hundreds of times before, but today felt different. Today, the very air seemed charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Whatever he was about to discover would challenge everything he thought he knew about the wild hearts that called Zion home. Behind him, Angel's Pool continued its patient duty, reflecting the morning sky while holding secrets that would soon change how humans understood the desperate mathematics of survival. The narrow side canyon Jake followed had been carved by millennia of flash floods into a serpentine passage barely wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast. Towering walls of striated sandstone rose 300 feet on either side, creating a cool corridor that offered blessed relief from the mounting heat. But today, even this natural sanctuary felt oppressive, as if the rocks themselves were holding their breath. Jake moved with the practiced silence of someone who'd learned wilderness skills from his grandfather, a Blackfeet elder who'd taught him that the land spoke to those patient enough to listen. Every footstep was calculated to avoid loose stones. Every pause timed to allow his senses to process the subtle information that most people missed entirely. The tracks he followed told an increasingly impossible story with each passing yard. The mountain lion prints, definitely female. Definitely. Large showed no signs of stalking behavior. No pause and crouch patterns. No careful positioning for ambush. Instead, they moved in steady parallels to the bull's massive hoofprints, maintaining a consistent distance of roughly 10 feet. Jake had tracked hundreds of cougars over his career, and this behavior defied every pattern he'd ever documented. More puzzling still, the bull's tracks showed no evidence of panic or flight response. A domestic animal encountering a large predator should have scattered, charged, or at minimum shown. The erratic movement patterns of extreme stress. These prints displayed the steady, unhurried gait of an animal completely at ease with its surroundings. Jake paused at a bend in the canyon, pulling out his binoculars to scan the passage ahead. The tracks led toward Sanctuary Spring, a hidden water source that he'd discovered 15 years ago and never reported to headquarters. Some places were too precious to share with bureaucracy, and Sanctuary Spring had become his personal retreat during the most challenging cases of his career. The sound reached him first, a low, rhythmic rumbling that definitely wasn't water flowing. Over rocks. Jake dropped to a crouch, using a boulder for cover as he adjusted his binoculars to maximum magnification. What he saw through the lenses challenged not just his professional training, but his fundamental understanding of how nature worked. A massive Angus bull stood knee-deep in the crystal-clear pool of Sanctuary Spring, his black coat gleaming in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the canyon's narrow opening. The animal was magnificent, easily 2,000 pounds of prime beef cattle, with the heavy musculature and confident bearing of a champion breeding bull. But that wasn't what made Jake's hands tremble as he struggled to keep the binoculars steady. On the rocks above the spring, positioned like a sentinel watching over sleeping children, lay a female mountain lion. Her tawny coat bore the scars of battles fought and survived, parallel marks across her shoulders that spoke of defensive wounds, a notched ear that suggested close encounters with larger predators. She was magnificent in her own right, probably 6 feet from nose to tail tip, and carrying the lean muscle mass of an apex predator at her physical peak. But she wasn't hunting. She wasn't even tense. The cougar lay in the classic sphinx position that cats adopted when completely relaxed, her golden eyes fixed not on the vulnerable bull below, but on the canyon approaches where potential threats might emerge. Jake watched in stunned fascination as the bull finished drinking and began moving toward the shallow end of the pool. The mountain lion's head turned to track his movement, but instead of predatory focus, her expression showed what could only be described as concern. When the bull slipped slightly on the wet rocks, the cougar actually shifted position, moving closer to the edge of her perch as if preparing to help. "This is impossible," Jake whispered, but the evidence continued unfolding before his eyes. The bull, having regained his footing, looked directly up at the mountain lion. For several heartbeats, predator and prey regarded each other with what appeared to be mutual recognition and acceptance. Then the bull made a soft lowing sound, not distressed, not challenging, but almost conversational. The mountain lion responded with a low chuff, the sound mother cougars made when communicating with their cubs. Jake fumbled for his camera, his ranger training finally overriding his amazement. Whatever he was witnessing needed documentation, even if no one would believe it without photographic evidence. Through his telephoto lens, He captured image after image of the impossible scene. The bull moving to a sunny patch of sand beside the pool, settling down with the comfortable confidence of an animal in familiar territory. The mountain lion descending from her rocky perch to drink from the same water source the bull had just vacated. Both animals sharing the small oasis with the casual ease of old friends. His radio crackled softly, and Jake quickly turned down the volume, not wanting to disturb the scene playing out before him. But the interruption reminded him of the impossible situation he was documenting. How could he possibly explain this to Chief Ranger Stone? How could he file a report that claimed a mountain lion was protecting a bull instead of hunting it? The answer came as he watched the mountain lion finish drinking and move to a shaded area, roughly 20 feet from where the bull had settled. Instead of the careful positioning that would allow for a surprise attack, she chose a spot that offered clear sight lines to all the canyon's approaches while remaining close enough to the bull to what? Provide protection? Jake's mind raced. Through every piece of wildlife behavioral training he'd ever received, every scientific paper he'd read, every conversation with experienced trackers and biologists, nothing in his quarter-century of experience had prepared him for what he was observing. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior, this was a complete rewriting of predator-prey relationships. As if sensing his scrutiny, the mountain lion's head turned toward Jake's hiding place. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Jake felt the full weight of her intelligence and awareness. She knew he was there. She'd probably known from the moment he'd entered the canyon. But instead of fleeing or showing territorial aggression, she simply studied him with calm assessment, then returned her attention to watching the canyon approaches. Jake's radio buzzed again, and this time he couldn't ignore it. The display showed Chief Ranger Stone's direct line. She was checking on his progress. But how could he possibly explain what he was seeing? How could he describe an alliance that shouldn't exist between species that evolution had designed as mortal enemies? The bull stirred slightly, lifting his massive head to look in Jake's direction. Like the mountain lion, he showed no fear or surprise at human presence. Instead, there was something almost welcoming in his dark eyes, as if he, too, understood that witness to their impossible partnership might be exactly what the situation required. Jake made his decision. Whatever was happening at Sanctuary Spring represented something unprecedented in wildlife behavior. His responsibility as both a park ranger and a student of the natural world was to document, understand, and protect this phenomenon until he could determine what it meant for the broader ecosystem. He keyed his radio with trembling fingers, knowing that his next words would set in motion a chain of events that would either validate the most extraordinary wildlife discovery of his career or end it in bureaucratic disgrace. "Base, this is Whitehorse. I need to speak with Chief Stone immediately." Jake's voice carried across the canyon as he keyed his radio, his eyes never leaving the impossible scene before him. The mountain lion, he'd started thinking of her as Sierra based on the ridge-like scars across her shoulders, had moved closer to the bull during his observation. Not stalking, positioning herself between the massive animal and the most vulnerable approach to their shared sanctuary. "Jake, please tell me you've got good news." Patricia Stone's voice crackled back within seconds. "Henderson's threatening to bring his own search party into the park, and I've got 3 reporters already asking questions about missing livestock and predator activity. Chief, I need you to contact Dr. Elena Rodriguez at the University of Utah, the Cougar specialist who consulted on the Bryce Canyon incident last year. We need her expertise immediately." The silence stretched long enough that Jake wondered if his radio had malfunctioned. When Stone finally responded, her voice carried the careful tone of someone navigating potential career-ending conversations. "Jake, what exactly are you looking at out there?" Through his binoculars, Jake watched Sierra stand and stretch, her movements flowing with the liquid grace that made mountain lions such effective predators. But instead of approaching the bull, she moved to a different vantage point, one that offered better visibility of the canyon's southern approach. The bull Goliath, Jake decided, given his magnificent size, lifted his head to track her movement, then settled back into his resting position with complete trust. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm looking at a female mountain lion sharing water and territory with Henderson's missing bull. They're not just coexisting, Chief. They're cooperating. Cooperating how? Jake watched Sierra's ears swivel toward a sound he couldn't detect, her body tensing slightly. Goliath immediately responded to her alertness, rising to his feet and positioning himself behind a large boulder that would provide cover from whatever had caught the cougar's attention. The coordination was unmistakable. The cougar is acting as an early warning system. The bull responds to her behavioral cues like they've been partners for months, not days. Chief, this contradicts everything we know about predator-prey relationships. Jesus, Jake, you know how this sounds, right? Henderson's bull has been missing for 3 weeks. If there's a cougar in the area, it's either dead and eaten, or it's going to be. Mountain lions don't protect livestock. Sierra relaxed as whatever had triggered her alertness moved away, and Goliath resumed his comfortable position. Jake documented the exchange with rapid-fire photographs, knowing he'd need irrefutable evidence for what was coming next. I need Dr. Rodriguez here before anyone attempts capture or intervention. What I'm observing requires scientific validation, not cowboy solutions. The cost alone. Chief, if I'm right about what I'm seeing, this could represent the most significant behavioral adaptation in recorded wildlife history. If I'm wrong, we proceed with standard protocols. But if we intervene now without understanding what's happening, we might destroy something unprecedented. Stone's sigh carried clearly over the radio. 2 hours, Jake. Dr. Rodriguez can be here by this afternoon if I can reach her. But if Henderson shows up with his ranch hands and rifles, I'm not stopping them over a theory. Jake watched Sierra rise again, this time moving toward the water's edge where Goliath was drinking. The bull shifted slightly, making room for her. Approach, and both animals drank from the same pool simultaneously, the lion maintaining alertness while the bull focused on hydration. Make the call, Chief, and tell Dr. Rodriguez to bring her long-range observation equipment. Something tells me getting too close is going to complicate everything we think we understand about this situation. As Jake signed off, he settled into position for extended observation, knowing that the next few hours would either validate the most extraordinary wildlife discovery of his career or mark the beginning of the end for two animals whose impossible alliance had already changed everything he thought he knew about survival, adaptation, and the mysterious ways that desperate creatures sometimes found hope in the most unlikely partnerships. The drought had forced them all beyond familiar territory. Now it remained to be seen whether human curiosity would prove as adaptable as the wild hearts they'd come to study. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived at Zion National Park at 2:47 p.m. Her dusty Toyota Prius loaded with enough scientific equipment to stock a small research station. Jake met her at the visitor center, recognizing immediately the skeptical set of her shoulders and the way her dark eyes assessed him like a specimen under examination. At 42, Elena had built her reputation on methodical observation and rigorous data collection, traits that had made her the Southwest's leading expert on cougar behavior and the least likely scientist to accept extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence. "Ranger Whitehorse," she said, her handshake firm and brief. "I've read your preliminary report 3 times. Either you've discovered something that will rewrite wildlife behavioral textbooks, or you've been in the desert sun too long." Jake helped her load equipment into his Park Service vehicle, noting the specialized cameras, motion sensors, and GPS tracking devices she'd brought. I've been questioning my own sanity for the past 6 hours, Dr. Rodriguez. That's exactly why we need your expertise. Call me Elena, and let's establish some ground rules before we head out there. She consulted a tablet loaded with her research notes. Mountain lions are solitary ambush predators. They don't form alliances with prey species. They certainly don't protect livestock. What you're describing contradicts 15 years of my field research and about a century of established science. The drive to Sanctuary Canyon took 40 minutes, during which Elena peppered Jake with technical questions about territorial markings, behavioral patterns, and environmental factors. Her skepticism remained evident, but Jake detected growing curiosity beneath her professional armor. The drought's impact has been severe, Jake explained as they parked at the trailhead. We've documented behavioral changes in dozens of species. Increased aggression, territorial expansion, altered feeding patterns. But what I observed this morning goes beyond adaptation. It suggests conscious cooperation between natural enemies. Elena shouldered her camera pack and followed Jake down the familiar trail. Conscious cooperation implies cognitive abilities that most scientists wouldn't attribute to either species. You're suggesting these animals are making strategic decisions based on mutual benefit analysis. I'm suggesting they've found a way to survive that defies our understanding of how nature works. They approached Sanctuary Canyon with the careful stealth of experienced wildlife observers. Elena deployed her equipment at Jake's suggested vantage point, setting up telephoto lenses and digital recording devices, while Jake provided visual confirmation that both animals remained at the water source. There, Jake whispered, handing Elena his binoculars. 11 o'clock from the large boulder. Elena adjusted the focus and went completely still. Through the lenses, she could see exactly what Jake had described: a massive Angus bull resting comfortably beside a crystal clear spring, while a large female mountain lion maintained watch from an elevated position 20 yards away. But it was the next few minutes of observation that began dismantling her scientific certainty. A family of javelinas approached the water source from the south, their bristled backs and aggressive posturing suggesting they were prepared to fight for access to the precious resource. The mountain lion immediately stood, her attention focused on the approaching threat. But instead of preparing to hunt the smaller prey animals, she made a series of low vocalizations that caused the bull to rise and position himself between the javelinas and the water. "That's not possible," Elena whispered, her voice tight with confusion. "Cougars don't use warning calls with other species, and bulls don't respond to feline communication." The standoff lasted several minutes, with the javelinas ultimately deciding that confronting a 2,000-pound bull wasn't worth access to water they could find elsewhere. As they departed, the mountain lion settled back into her watch position while the bull returned to his resting spot. "Play that back," Elena said, indicating the digital recorder that had captured the entire exchange. As they listened to the audio playback, she identified at least 3 distinct vocalizations from the cougar, each apparently corresponding to specific responses from the bull. "It's communication," Jake said. "Not just instinctive reaction. They're actually talking to each other." Elena began documenting everything with scientific precision: body language, positioning, timing of interactions, environmental factors. Her training demanded skepticism, but her eyes were recording evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and adaptability. The afternoon's observations continued to build an impossible case. They watched the cougar hunt successfully, taking down a rabbit with practiced efficiency. But instead of consuming her, kill immediately, she carried the prey to within 10 yards of the bull and began feeding close enough to share the territory, but positioned so she could continue monitoring their surroundings. "She's maintaining guard duty even while eating," Elena murmured, making rapid notes. "That level of strategic thinking requires sophisticated cognitive processing." Most remarkably, when the bull approached the water for an afternoon drink, the cougar actually shifted positions to provide better oversight of the approaches. The bull seemed to understand this protection, showing none of the skittish alertness that cattle typically displayed in predator territory. 15 years of cougar research, Elena said finally, lowering her binoculars. I've documented territorial disputes, mating behaviors, hunting strategies, maternal care patterns. I've never seen anything remotely resembling what we just observed. Jake felt vindication and concern in equal measure. So I'm not losing my mind? You're documenting something unprecedented. But Jake, if this alliance is real, it raises questions that go far beyond wildlife management. Elena began packing her equipment as the afternoon light faded. This suggests adaptation strategies that evolution shouldn't have had time to develop. Either these animals are demonstrating intelligence capabilities we've never recognized, or environmental pressure is forcing behavioral changes at a rate that challenges our understanding of how species respond to crisis. As they prepared to leave Sanctuary Canyon, both animals remained in their established positions, the bull resting peacefully while the cougar maintained vigilant watch. Their partnership had survived scientific scrutiny, but Jake knew the real test was just beginning. Elena's documentation would either provide the credibility needed to protect this remarkable alliance, or it would attract attention that could destroy the very phenomenon they'd come to study. What happens next? Jake asked as they reached the trailhead. Elena looked back toward the canyon where two impossible partners continued their drought-driven alliance. Now we find out whether the scientific community is as adaptable as the animals were supposed to be studying. Luna emerged from the pre-dawn shadows like a gray ghost, her pregnant belly swollen with the promise of cubs she might not live to see born. The alpha female of the Zion pack moved with the calculated precision of a predator, pushed beyond desperation, her pack of 6 following in tight formation behind her. The drought had stolen their traditional hunting grounds, forcing them into territories where survival meant taking risks that would have been unthinkable in better times. For 3 days, Luna's scouts had reported the impossible, a massive bull sharing water and territory with a mountain lion in the hidden canyon where Sanctuary Spring provided the region's most reliable water source. The reports defied every hunting instinct Luna had developed over 8 years of pack leadership, but desperation had taught her to investigate anomalies rather than dismiss them. Jake Whitehorse crouched behind his observation blind at 5:30 a.m. His radio turned to whisper quiet as he documented the 4th day of Sierra and Goliath's alliance. Elena Rodriguez had returned to the university to analyze their initial findings, but she'd left behind motion-activated cameras and audio recording equipment that continued gathering evidence around the clock. Through his binoculars, Jake watched Sierra stretch awake on her rocky perch, her routine as predictable as sunrise. She would scan the canyon approaches, check on Goliath's position, then descend to drink before beginning her morning patrol of their shared territory. But today, her behavior showed subtle changes that Jake's trained eye immediately recognized. As threat assessment, Sierra's ears swiveled constantly, and her tail twitched with the restless energy that cougars displayed when detecting nearby predators. She made a low vocalization, not quite a growl, not quite a purr that caused Goliath to lift his massive head from where he'd been dozing near the water's edge. The bull's response confirmed Jake's growing understanding of their communication system. Goliath moved away from the open water to a position that offered better cover, but instead of seeking maximum protection for himself, he positioned his bulk to shield Sierra's drinking spot from the canyon's most vulnerable approach. "They know something's coming," Jake whispered into his recorder, documenting the behavioral changes that preceded the morning's dramatic events. Luna's pack approached Sanctuary Canyon using the sophisticated hunting strategies that had kept them alive through 8 months of the worst drought conditions in recorded history. 2 wolves circled wide to approach from the south, while Luna led the remaining 4 from the traditional northern route. Their coordination demonstrated the intelligence that made wolves such effective predators, but it also revealed the desperation that was driving them toward a confrontation with prey they'd never encountered in combination. The first Wolf Scout appeared on the southern rim at 6:15 a.m., a lean female whose ribs showed clearly through her summer coat. Sierra spotted the movement instantly, her body coiling into the alert crouch that preceded either flight or fight. But instead of fleeing, she made a series of rapid, low-pitched calls that brought Goliath to immediate attention. Jake watched in fascination as the bull responded to Sierra's warnings with movements that seemed impossible for a domestic animal. Goliath positioned himself near a cluster of boulders that would prevent the wolves from attacking as a coordinated pack, while Sierra moved to higher ground that offered multiple escape routes while maintaining visual contact with her unlikely partner. "This is incredible," Jake breathed, adjusting his camera settings to capture what was about to unfold. "They're using terrain features like they've been hunting together for years." Luna appeared on the northern approach with 3 pack members, her yellow eyes immediately assessing the unusual defensive formation below. The alpha wolf had survived by making quick, accurate judgments about risk versus reward, and what she saw challenged every calculation she'd ever made. The bull was positioned defensively rather than in panic, suggesting experience with predator encounters that domestic cattle shouldn't possess. More puzzling, the mountain lion hadn't fled at the first sign of pack wolves, indicating either illness, injury, or some strategic advantage that Luna couldn't immediately identify. Luna made the decision that would define the morning's confrontation. She would test the strength of this unusual alliance with a probing attack that would reveal whether cooperation or desperation held these natural enemies together. The alpha wolf's howl echoed through the canyon, a sound that should have triggered immediate flight responses in both prey animals. Instead, Sierra answered with a cougar's scream, a sound that Jake had heard perhaps a dozen times in his 25-year career, and never in response to wolf vocalizations. "They're talking to each other," Jake realized, his pulse quickening, as he documented the unprecedented interspecies communication. The wolves, the cougar, even Goliath, they're all part of the same conversation. Luna's pack began the coordinated approach that had proven successful against elk, deer, and even young bison. 2 wolves would create distraction while the others attacked from the flanks, overwhelming prey through superior numbers and tactical positioning. But as they moved into attack formation, Sierra and Goliath's response shattered every assumption about how this encounter should proceed. Sierra didn't retreat to save herself. Instead, she moved closer to Goliath, positioning herself between the approaching wolves and the bull's most vulnerable flank. Goliath, rather than bolting in panic, lowered his massive head and presented his horns toward the primary threat while backing toward a rock formation that would protect his rear. The first probing attack came from Luna's 2 flanking wolves, testing the coordination between the unlikely allies. Sierra met the challenge with the fluid grace that made mountain lions such formidable predators, but her defensive positioning prioritized protecting Goliath over optimal hunting angles for herself. Jake's camera captured the moment that would eventually grace the cover of National Geographic, a scarred mountain lion standing guard over a massive bull while wolves circled their shared sanctuary, all species pushed beyond normal behavioral boundaries by environmental crisis that demanded adaptation or death. The morning's battle was just beginning. But already Jake understood that he was witnessing something that would redefine scientific understanding of intelligence, cooperation, and survival in the natural world. The attack began at 6:47 a.m. with the coordinated precision that had made Luna's pack the most successful predators in the region before drought changed all the rules. Jake watched through his telephoto lens as 2 wolves created a feint from the south, while Luna led the main assault from higher ground. But what unfolded next shattered every assumption about predator-prey relationships he'd accumulated over 25 years of wildlife observation. Sierra's response was immediate and tactical. Instead of fleeing to save herself, the natural cougar response to overwhelming odds, she positioned herself at Goliath's left shoulder, using her superior agility to guard his blind spot while the bull faced the primary threat. The coordination was seamless, suggesting communication and trust that shouldn't have been possible between species separated by millions of years of evolution. Goliath's transformation from gentle domestic animal to wild survivor was equally remarkable. The massive bull lowered his head and presented nearly 4 feet of curved horn toward Luna's approach, while his hooves found purchase on the rocky ground with the sure-footedness of an animal born to mountain terrain. His 2,000-pound bulk became a living fortress that the wolves would have to overcome through strategy rather than simple pack tactics. The first collision came when Luna's beta male attempted to hamstring Goliath from behind, only to find Sierra waiting with extended claws and the reflexes that made mountain lions such formidable predators. The wolf yelped and retreated, blood streaming from parallel gashes across his shoulder. But Luna immediately adapted her strategy. "She's learning their defensive pattern in real time," Jake whispered into his recorder, documenting the intelligence being displayed by all parties. "This isn't instinctive pack hunting, it's battlefield adaptation." Luna split her remaining pack members, sending 2 wolves to engage Sierra directly while she and her strongest male attempted to isolate Goliath. The strategy might have worked against normal prey, but the alliance between cougar and bull created defensive possibilities that no predator had ever encountered. When the 2 wolves rushed Sierra, Goliath didn't retreat to safety. Instead, the massive bull pivoted with surprising agility, using his bulk to block the wolves' retreat route while Sierra dealt with the immediate threat. The maneuver trapped one wolf between predator and prey, creating a tactical nightmare that forced Luna to call off the attack. But the respite was temporary. Luna's pregnant condition was driving desperation that wouldn't be deterred by initial failure. The alpha wolf regrouped her pack at the canyon's mouth, her yellow eyes calculating new approaches, while her packmates licked wounds and assessed the unprecedented defensive alliance they faced. Jake's radio crackled softly. Elena Rodriguez, calling from the university with preliminary analysis of their recorded data. But Jake couldn't break his concentration to respond. What was happening at Sanctuary Spring had moved beyond scientific documentation into something approaching warfare, with intelligence being displayed by all parties that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition. Sierra used the break-in action to check Goliath for injuries, her behavior showing what could only be described as medical assessment. The bull had sustained several minor cuts from wolf claws, but nothing life-threatening. More remarkably, Goliath lowered his massive head to allow Sierra easier access to examine a scratch near his left eye, a gesture of trust that Jake had never seen between wild predator and domestic prey. "They're not just cooperating," Jake breathed, photographing the interaction. "They're bonded." She's checking his injuries like a mother examining her cub. Luna's second attack came without warning, a desperate gambit that revealed the full extent of her pack's starvation. The alpha wolf led a direct frontal assault while her remaining 4 packmates attempted to overwhelm through sheer numbers and aggression. The strategy was high risk but born of the cruel mathematics of drought survival. Success meant food for her unborn cubs. Failure meant the end of her genetic line. Sierra met the charge with the explosive power that made mountain lions capable of taking down prey twice their size, but her positioning again prioritized protecting Goliath over optimal combat angles. The cougar's tactical sacrifice allowed one of Luna's packmates to get close enough to the bull's flank to attempt a crippling bite. Goliath's response demolished any remaining assumptions about domestic animal helplessness in wild situations. The bull's rear leg lashed out with devastating accuracy, catching the attacking wolf in the ribs with enough force to send the animal tumbling across the rocky ground. But the victory came at a cost. Goliath's defensive movement exposed his shoulder to Luna's direct attack. The alpha wolf's jaws found purchase just behind Goliath's left front leg, her teeth sinking deep enough to draw blood and trigger what should have been a fatal feeding frenzy. But Sierra's counterattack was immediate and savage, her claws raking across Luna's back, with enough force to break the wolf's grip and send her scrambling for safety. In the aftermath of the failed assault, both sides assessed their situation with the cold calculation of predators who understood that survival sometimes demanded retreat. Luna's pack had sustained injuries that would affect their hunting effectiveness for weeks, while Goliath bled from several wounds that would require careful monitoring to prevent infection. But it was the third casualty, a young wolf, who'd struck his head against the canyon rocks during Sierra's defensive charge that created the moral crisis Jake had dreaded since beginning his observation. The juvenile lay motionless beside the spring, his breathing shallow and his left rear leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Sierra approached the injured wolf with the caution of a predator assessing potential threat. But when she reached the motionless animal, her behavior shifted into something that defied every natural law Jake thought he understood. Instead of delivering a killing bite to eliminate a future threat, the mountain lion made a series of soft vocalizations, the same sounds she used to communicate with Goliath. The injured wolf lifted his head slightly, his eyes meeting Sierra's with what appeared to be recognition rather than fear. For several heartbeats, predator and prey regarded each other across a gulf that evolution had designed to be unbridgeable. Jake's hands trembled as he photographed what happened next, Sierra stepping back to allow Goliath access to the injured wolf, the massive bull lowering his head to examine the smaller animal with gentle curiosity, and most impossibly, the wolf accepting their proximity. Without struggle or panic, the drought had pushed them all beyond the boundaries of normal behavior. But what Jake was witnessing suggested that some boundaries were more flexible than anyone had imagined. Dr. Kelly Trump arrived at Zing National Park at dawn, her veterinary emergency kit loaded with everything from field surgical supplies to advanced wildlife tranquilizers. Jake's urgent call had reached her at 11 p.m. the previous night, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd witnessed nature rewriting its own rules. By midnight, she was driving through the Nevada desert, her mind racing through the implications of what Jake had described. A mountain lion protecting an injured wolf while a bull stands guard. Kelly muttered to herself as she parked at the ranger station. Either Jake's having a breakdown, or I'm about to document the most extraordinary case of interspecies cooperation in veterinary history. Alina Rodriguez had returned from the university with additional recording equipment and a portable weather station, her initial skepticism replaced by scientific excitement, tempered with profound bewilderment. She met Kelly at the trailhead, her dark eyes bright with the intensity of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. I've reviewed 48 hours of continuous footage, Alina told Kelly as they hiked towards Sanctuary Canyon. The behavioral patterns we're documenting don't exist in any literature. These animals are displaying cognitive abilities that challenge basic assumptions about consciousness, empathy, and decision-making in non-human species. Jake waited at his observation blind, his face drawn with the exhaustion of someone who'd maintained vigilant watch through a night that had redefined everything he thought he understood about wildlife behavior. Through his binoculars, he could see the aftermath of yesterday's battle, Sierra positioned protectively near the injured wolf pup, Goliath maintaining a broader perimeter watch, and Luna's pack maintaining nervous distance, while clearly reluctant to abandon their wounded number. The injured wolf, I'm calling him Scout, hasn't moved since yesterday afternoon, Jake briefed the arriving team. Sierra's been bringing him water soaked in moss. Goliath uses his bulk to provide shade during the hottest parts of the day, And the pack hasn't left. The area, which suggests Luna's maternal instincts, are overriding normal pack survival protocols. Kelly deployed her veterinary equipment with practiced efficiency, setting up a portable examination station that would allow her to treat the injured wolf without separating him from the unlikely guardians who'd kept him alive through the night. Her specialized training in wildlife medicine had prepared her for treating animals in their natural habitat, but nothing had prepared her for working within an active interspecies alliance. "I need to examine Scout's injuries," Kelly explained, "but approaching will require cooperation from all parties. If Sierra perceives me as a threat to either Goliath or the wolf, she could attack. If Luna's pack thinks I'm endangering their pup, they could charge. And if Goliath decides I'm a predator, 2,000 pounds of protective bull could end this very quickly." Elena consulted her behavioral notes from the previous day's observations. Sierra has shown consistent protective behavior toward both species. She might accept human intervention if we can communicate that we're here to help rather than threaten. The approach took nearly an hour of careful positioning and patient movement. Kelly advanced in stages, allowing each animal to assess her intentions while maintaining non-threatening body language. Jake provided real-time behavioral analysis through his radio, identifying signs of stress or acceptance in each species. As Kelly drew closer to the injured wolf, the breakthrough came. When Sierra actually approached Kelly, her golden eyes studying the veterinarian with intelligent assessment. The mountain lion circled the human slowly, clearly evaluating threat levels, then made a series of soft vocalizations that brought Goliath's attention to the interaction. "She's introducing me to him," Kelly whispered in amazement. "She's actually facilitating the introduction." Goliath's acceptance was more gradual, but equally remarkable. The massive bull lowered his head to examine Kelly's veterinary kit, his behavior showing curiosity rather than aggression. When Kelly extended her hand slowly, Goliath allowed her to touch his muzzle, a gesture of trust that domestic cattle rarely offered to strangers, let alone in wild territory surrounded by predators. Scout's examination revealed a concussion and a dislocated hip, injuries that would normally prove fatal for a wolf separated from pack support. But Sierra's protective care and Goliath's provision of shade and security had created survival conditions that shouldn't have existed in nature. "I can treat his injuries," Kelly announced, "but recovery will take weeks. Someone needs to provide continued care, protection, and feeding support during his rehabilitation." The answer came from an unexpected source. Marcus Henderson arrived at the canyon rim with Chief Ranger Patricia Stone, both having hiked the trail after receiving Jake's latest reports. The rancher who'd originally demanded Goliath's immediate return now stood, looking down at his missing bull protecting the mountain lion who was caring for an injured wolf. "That's my Goliath down there," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying wonder rather than anger. "Raised him from a calf. Never seen him act aggressive toward anything in his life. But look at him now, he's protecting that cat like she's family." Patricia Stone surveyed the scene through binoculars, her administrative training warring with the evidence of her own eyes. "We're looking at a complete revision of wildlife management protocols. If this alliance is sustainable, it represents adaptation. Strategies that could be crucial for species survival during extreme climate events." Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone present. "I'm not taking Goliath back to the ranch," he announced. "Not while this partnership is working, but I can help support it. My property borders the park on the south side. I can create water sources, provide supplemental feeding areas, and offer protected territory that connects to their current range." Kelly began treating Scout's injuries while the unprecedented cooperation between humans mirrored the alliance they were protecting. Elena documented everything with scientific precision. Jake coordinated logistics through park communications, and Patricia worked through the bureaucratic requirements for establishing the first Official Human-Wildlife Cooperative Management Zone in National Park Service History. As the sun reached its zenith, Scout opened his eyes and accepted water from Kelly's hands while Sierra maintained protective watch and Goliath provided shade. Luna's pack observed from a respectful distance, their alpha female making soft whining sounds that seemed to express gratitude for the care being provided to her pack member. We're not just treating an injured animal, Kelly realized as she worked. We're midwifing the birth of a new kind of relationship between humans and wildlife, one based on cooperation rather than control. The drought had forced them all beyond familiar boundaries, but what was emerging in its wake offered hope that adaptation and intelligence could triumph over even the most desperate circumstances. Tommy Crow. Feather's video went live on TikTok at 6:33 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, accompanied by the caption that would change everything. Mountain lion protects injured wolf while bull stands guard. Zion National Park, Utah. Nature is rewriting the rules. Hashtag Wildlife Alliance. Hashtag Zion National Park. Hashtag Climate Adaptation. Within 12 hours, the 47-second clip had accumulated 2.3 million views, 847,000 likes, and been shared across every major social media platform. Tommy's carefully edited footage showed Sierra gently nudging Scout to drink water, Goliath positioning himself to provide shade, and Luna's pack maintaining respectful distance, while their alpha female made soft vocalizations toward her recovering pack member. "Holy shit," Tommy whispered, staring at his phone's notification screen as numbers continued climbing exponentially. "I think I just broke the internet." Jake found Tommy at the ranger station at 5 a.m., the young ranger's face pale, with the realization that his documentation had unleashed forces neither of them had anticipated. Outside, 3 news vans were already setting up satellite equipment while reporters prepared for live broadcasts that would beam the Sanctuary Canyon story to millions of viewers across the globe. CNN, Fox, BBC, National Geographic, and something called Viral Wildlife Daily. Jake read from the list of media requests Chief Ranger Stone had compiled overnight. "Tommy, what exactly did you post?" "Just what we've been documenting," Tommy said defensively, pulling up the viral video on his tablet. Sierra caring for Scout, Goliath protecting them both, the pack showing what looks like gratitude. "I thought people should see that cooperation is possible even in crisis situations." But the comments section revealed how the story was being interpreted and weaponized by audiences hungry for content that confirmed their existing beliefs. Climate activists claimed the alliance proved animals were more adaptable than humans. Conservative voices argued it demonstrated natural hierarchies that humans should emulate. Conspiracy theorists suggested government manipulation of wildlife behavior. Religious groups proclaimed it evidence of divine intervention during environmental collapse. "Sierra the Guardian Cougar has her own hashtag," Elena observed, reviewing the social media explosion from her makeshift field laboratory. "There are t-shirts, coffee mugs, and someone started a crowdfunding campaign to protect the miracle animals of Zion. The scientific story is being completely overwhelmed by emotional narrative." Patricia Stone faced the media circus with the grim efficiency of someone who'd spent her career managing crises. But the scale of attention was unprecedented for a national park that typically dealt with hiking accidents and tourist overflows rather than global wildlife phenomena. "We're implementing immediate access restrictions to Sanctuary Canyon," she announced during the emergency staff meeting. "No media, no tourists, no unauthorized personnel. The animals' welfare takes priority over public interest." But the restrictions only intensified media interest. News helicopters circled the canyon boundaries, trying to capture footage of the famous alliance. Tour companies offered wildlife miracle packages that brought hundreds of additional visitors to an already drought-stressed ecosystem. Street vendors appeared selling Sierra and Goliath merchandise outside the park entrance. Marcus Henderson's ranch became an unexpected media staging ground when word spread that he was providing supplemental territory for the Alliance. Reporters camped outside his gates, requesting interviews about his transformation from rancher to wildlife advocate and his unprecedented cooperation with predators. "This isn't what I signed up for," Marcus told Jake during a late night phone call. "I agreed to help create sustainable habitat, not become the poster child for human-wildlife cooperation. There are news crews on my property at all hours, and half of them are asking if I'm planning to train cougars to protect cattle." The most disturbing development came from wildlife trafficking networks that saw the Alliance as evidence that exotic animals could be trained for unusual purposes. Elena received reports of increased cougar poaching in surrounding states, with trappers claiming they were seeking animals that could bond with livestock like the Zion cats. "We've inadvertently created a market for something that doesn't exist," Elena warned during a crisis meeting with park officials. "People are seeing our documentation and assuming this behavior can be replicated through training or breeding programs. They don't understand that what we're observing represents unique environmental pressures and individual animal personalities." Tommy grappled with the unintended consequences of his viral documentation. The young ranger had entered conservation work, believing that public awareness would lead to increased protection for wildlife. But the media circus surrounding the Alliance was creating new threats even as it generated unprecedented support. There's a petition with 400,000 signatures demanding that Zion be designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site based on the Alliance, Tommy reported. But there's also a counter-petition with 200,000 signatures claiming we're interfering with natural selection and should relocate all the animals immediately. The breaking point came when a reality TV production company offered the National Park Service $5 million for exclusive filming rights to document the Alliance for a show tentatively titled Nature's Miracle Family. The proposal included constructing permanent camera installations and providing supplemental feeding to ensure dramatic footage for each episode. "Over my dead body," Patricia Stone declared, her administrative caution finally giving way to protective instincts. "These animals have survived by trusting each other and adapting to crisis conditions. I won't let them become entertainment for people who see wildlife as content rather than living beings deserving respect." Jake stood at his observation blind that evening, watching Sierra groom scouts recovering injuries while Goliath maintained perimeter watch and Luna's pack rested peacefully nearby. The Alliance that had begun as a survival strategy had become a symbol of hope for millions of people facing their own environmental challenges, but the attention that was supposed to protect them now threatened to destroy the very conditions that had made their cooperation possible. The drought had forced them beyond normal behavioral boundaries, and now human fascination threatened to push them beyond the possibility of peaceful coexistence. "We saved them from wolves and dehydration," Jake reflected, speaking into his recorder. "Now we need to save them from ourselves." Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the world watched to see whether the miracle of Sanctuary Canyon could survive the weight of human expectations and the relentless pressure of global attention. The wildfire started at 2:17 a.m. on September 5th, ignited by a lightning strike that found perfect kindling in drought-stressed vegetation 40 miles northeast of Zion National Park. By dawn, the Crimson Canyon fire had consumed 12,000 acres and was advancing south with the relentless hunger that made Utah wildfires legendary for their destructive power. Jake received the emergency alert at 4:45 a.m., his phone buzzing with the automated evacuation notice that would change everything they'd worked to protect. The fire's projected path included Sanctuary Canyon, Marcus Henderson's ranch, and every water source that had sustained the Sierra Goliath Alliance through 8 months of unprecedented drought. "All personnel report immediately for emergency." Fire protocol briefing. Chief Ranger Patricia Stone's voice crackled through the radio network. We have 12 hours before the fire reaches park boundaries. Evacuation of all non-essential personnel begins at 0800 hours. Elena Rodriguez was already at her field station when Jake arrived, her scientific equipment being hastily packed into transport cases while she monitored the Alliance through her remote cameras. On her tablet screen, Sierra could be seen pacing restlessly while Goliath maintained his usual protective position, both animals displaying the stress behaviors that preceded major environmental changes. They know something's wrong, Elena reported, her voice tight with concern. Sierra's been agitated since 3 a.m., Goliath showing displacement behaviors, repetitive head movements, excessive drinking. Even Luna's pack has been more active than usual. Tommy Crowfeather arrived with his emergency documentation equipment, the young ranger's face grim with the weight of decisions that would determine whether his viral documentation became a record of miraculous cooperation or a final testament to animals that couldn't escape human-caused environmental catastrophe. National media is already calling, Tommy reported. They want exclusive coverage of the evacuation. CNN's offering helicopter support if we'll let them film the rescue of America's miracle animals. Patricia Stone stood before her assembled team with the bearing of someone who'd spent her career preparing for this exact scenario. But the complexity of their current situation pushed far beyond standard wildfire protocols. Normal evacuation procedures called for allowing wildlife to follow their natural flight instincts, but the Alliance they were protecting had no evolutionary template for coordinated evacuation between species that should be mortal enemies. The fire will reach Sanctuary Canyon by 4 p.m., Patricia announced. Standard protocol is to evacuate all human personnel and allow wildlife to disperse naturally. But we're not dealing with standard wildlife behavior. Marcus Henderson's voice came through the radio from his ranch command center where he was coordinating the evacuation of livestock while monitoring the approaching fire's advance. My property's directly in the fire path. I can evacuate most of my herd, but Goliath won't leave that canyon. I've tried calling him with the same signals I've used since he was a calf. He's not responding. Kelly Trump had arrived with emergency veterinary supplies and a mobile treatment unit that could handle trauma cases in field conditions. But her medical expertise couldn't address the central dilemma they faced. How do you evacuate an alliance that exists because of mutual protection and shared territory? Scout's still recovering from his injuries, Kelly reported after reviewing overnight medical data. He can travel, but not at the speed his pack would need to outrun a wildfire. Luna's not going to abandon him, which means the entire pack is at risk. Jake stood at his observation blind for what might be the final time, watching through binoculars as the impossible partnership that had redefined his understanding of wildlife behavior faced its ultimate test. Through the morning haze, he could see Sierra positioned on her usual rocky perch, but her attention was divided between watching the canyon approaches and scanning the northern horizon where smoke was beginning to darken the sky. They're all staying together, Jake observed. Sierra could escape easily. Mountain lions are built for fast movement through rough terrain. Luna's pack could outrun the fire if they abandoned Scout. Goliath could probably survive by moving to Marcus's ranch, but none of them are leaving. Elena's voice carried the weight of someone watching years of research face potential annihilation. The alliance that saved them from drought might kill them in fire. Their survival strategy has become a death trap. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tommy's viral video had reached Dr. Sarah Kim, a wildlife evacuation specialist who developed techniques for moving large animals during California's increasingly severe fire seasons. She'd driven through the night from UC Davis, bringing specialized equipment and experience in coordinated wildlife relocation. I've evacuated everything from black bears to wild horses, Dr. Kim explained as she surveyed the situation through Elena's cameras. But never a multi-species alliance that requires keeping natural enemies together during transport. The plan they developed pushed the boundaries of wildlife management into completely uncharted territory, using Marcus's livestock trailers modified, with partitions that would allow the animals to see and communicate with each other during transport. They would attempt to evacuate the entire alliance as a unit to a prepared sanctuary site 50 miles south of the fire zone. If this works, we'll have proven that human intervention can preserve wildlife relationships that evolution couldn't have prepared for, Alina said as they prepared to implement the most ambitious rescue operation in Park Service history. If it fails, Patricia added grimly, we'll have confirmed that some miracles are too fragile to survive the world's attention. Jake took one final look through his binoculars at Sierra, Goliath, Scout, and Luna's pack sharing their peaceful sanctuary beside the spring that had brought them together. In 6 hours, that canyon would be engulfed in flames hot enough to melt rock. The ultimate test of their alliance wasn't surviving wolves or drought or media attention. It was discovering whether the bonds forged in crisis could endure the most dangerous intervention of all, human attempts to save them. 6 months after the Crimson Canyon fire, Jake Whitehorse stood at the edge of New Sanctuary Springs, watching Sierra stretch awake on her favorite basking rock while Goliath grazed peacefully in the meadow below. The relocated habitat bore little resemblance to their original canyon home, but the partnership that had begun in drought-driven desperation had evolved into something that no wildfire could destroy. The evacuation had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Dr. Kim's modified transport system had kept the alliance intact during their harrowing escape, with Sierra actually calming Goliath during the most stressful moments of relocation, while Luna's pack, including the fully recovered Scout, traveled in an adjacent trailer that maintained visual contact throughout the journey. Monthly behavioral assessment, November 15th. Jake spoke into his digital recorder, documenting changes that continued to challenge scientific understanding. Sierra and Goliath maintain their cooperative partnership in the new environment. Territorial boundaries have expanded to include Luna's pack as permanent residents rather than occasional visitors. Scout has assumed a liaison role between pack and alliance, suggesting learned behaviors that are being transmitted to other pack members. The new sanctuary occupied 300 acres of Marcus Henderson's ranch land, redesigned with sustainable water systems, native plant restoration, and carefully managed grazing areas that supported both wildlife and limited cattle operations. The transformation had turned Marcus from struggling rancher into the Southwest's most celebrated example of regenerative agriculture, with universities sending students to study his integration of predator-prey relationships into sustainable farming practices. Elena Rodriguez had published her findings in Nature, Science, and National Geographic, with her research team documenting the first verified case of learned interspecies cooperation that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal cognition and environmental adaptation. The alliance had inspired similar observations worldwide, with researchers in Australia, Kenya, and Canada reporting unprecedented cooperative behaviors in wildlife facing extreme environmental pressures. We're witnessing accelerated evolution, Elena explained during her latest interview with Discovery Channel. Not genetic evolution, but behavioral and cognitive evolution happening within individual lifetimes. Climate change is forcing species to develop survival strategies that transcend millions of years of competitive programming. Tommy Crow Feather had become the Park Service's leading expert in conservation storytelling, his documentation techniques now taught at ranger academies across the country. His viral video had generated over 50 million views and inspired a generation of young conservationists. But more importantly, it had demonstrated how responsible media coverage could build public support for innovative wildlife management approaches. The key was showing people that cooperation isn't just possible, it's necessary. Tommy reflected during a presentation to fellow Rangers. Sierra and Goliath didn't overcome their natural instincts. They adapted those instincts to meet unprecedented challenges. That's what humans need to learn to do. Callie Trump's veterinary innovations had led to the establishment of the first Interspecies Alliance health monitoring program, with techniques developed during Scout's treatment now being used to provide medical care for wildlife without disrupting established social relationships. Her research had proven that healing could happen more effectively when animals maintained their chosen partnerships during recovery. Chief Ranger Patricia Stone had been promoted to Regional Conservation Director, her successful management of the Alliance becoming a model for national parks dealing with climate-driven changes in wildlife behavior. Under her leadership, the Park Service had established the Wildlife Adaptation Research Initiative, studying how environmental pressures were forcing rapid behavioral evolution across multiple species. The media attention had eventually subsided, replaced by sustained scientific interest and educational programs that brought students from around the world to observe the Alliance. But the most remarkable development was the appearance of similar partnerships in the wild, a young male cougar forming a protective relationship with orphaned elk calves in Montana, wolves in Alaska cooperating with ravens in unprecedented ways, and dolphins in Australia protecting injured seals from shark attacks. Luna's pack had grown to include 2 new litters, with cubs that showed no fear of Sierra or Goliath and actually played together under the watchful supervision of their parents. Scout had become the pack's ambassador, teaching younger wolves that cooperation could be more effective than competition when resources were scarce. As the sun set over New Sanctuary Springs, Jake watched Sierra descend from her rocky perch to drink alongside Goliath, their movements coordinated with the easy familiarity of old friends. Luna emerged from the tall grass with her newest cubs, approaching the water source that all species now shared without conflict. Final observation, Jake spoke into his recorder. The alliance that began as drought-driven survival strategy has become a model for how intelligence, adaptability, and cooperation can overcome seemingly impossible challenges. The animals didn't just survive environmental crisis, they transcended it by discovering that former enemies could become family when circumstances demanded innovation over instinct. The drought had ended, but the lessons learned during those desperate months continued to reshape understanding of what was possible when survival required abandoning old assumptions about competition and embracing new realities of cooperation. In nature, as in human society, the future belonged to those wise enough to recognize that the greatest strength often came from the most unexpected alliances.